Well, Paul, you talked a little bit about, okay, what we can expect to see in a report and those kind of things, but how do you actually go through this process of developing an opinion of value? I mean, what do you do?
Right. So on a residential appraisal, again, for secondary market purposes, there are 3 recognized approaches to an opinion of value. Now, almost always the one that will be used and included is a sales comparison approach, where we are looking at properties that have sold that are similar to the subject in a recent time frame. So that depends on market area, what that recent time frame is, but typically within the past year.
Especially in our market.
In our market, in a rural area.
In a smaller central Illinois and southern Illinois, you're going to be looking, even in towns of 100,000,
Yep.
you might be looking at a year.
Yep.
Whereas you get into the suburbs of Chicago, and it may be you're going to be looking at things in 3
couple months.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Absolutely.
because there's a lot more activity. So.
Yeah. So typically that sales comparison approach is always utilized where we're looking at the subject property and these comparable sales and making adjustments where there's differences. There are 2 other approaches to value that are widely recognized in residential appraisals, and that would be the cost approach. And in the cost approach, it's where we're figuring out, hey, if we were to rebuild that house today, or if it's new construction, if we're building that house today, based off of cost manuals, what should it cost to build? And if it's a home that's not new, then we're going to depreciate that house for however old it is. Same thing whenever you do a large remodel, maybe then a cost approach comes into play. Mm-hmm. The other approach is an income approach. However, that income approach only tends to be valid when that is an income generating property.
Sure.
Yeah.
The other thing, and you touched on it there real briefly, but and maybe this is not the place to ask, but I know that in teaching real estate courses, and I have different things, and we have a little CMA section, but where does the price per square foot come in now? And I'll just give you a little bit of my opinion, especially on CMAs. I look at price per square foot as a way to maybe verify or codify what I've come up with. I'm not one that likes to just go, okay, here's your square footage. Houses in this market are selling for $90 a square foot. Boom, there's your price. And is that...
Oh, I think you're absolutely right, because one of the interesting things that we see in real estate, in appraisal, and I would argue also in brokerage, is that, as an appraiser, we're always trying to measure market reaction. And whenever you take a number like square footage...
Okay,
right?
I want to understand, what is market reaction?
Well, it's your typical buyer in this case. What value would a typical buyer put on an item or a feature? And in this case, we're talking about square footage.
Okay.
Well, the interesting point about that as it comes into the appraisal is if you have a buyer, for example, walk into a 1980s ranch, okay, with a very closed, or I'm going to call it separated floor plan. But let's say that house is 1,500 square feet. Well, if that same buyer walks into let's say a mid-90s, early 2000s ranch or a remodeled ranch that has an open floor plan, but it's only 1,300 square feet. To that buyer, however, the second home may feel much larger than the first home. So, as you were saying, just pinning a dollar per square footage number oftentimes is not a valid point, because there's a lot of other factors that come into the valuation of that property.
So my thought process is, it may be a good way to say, well, if you came up with a value, and let's just say it was a 2,000 square foot, because that's easy to figure, but a 2,000 square foot, $100 a square foot, 200,000. So, but there's a lot of difference in 2,000 square foot homes, even in the same neighborhood.
Absolutely.
Because as we all know, that you can have a neighborhood that transitions, maybe it's a 70s or 80s neighborhood, and you've got some of those properties that have been remodeled, opened up, which is more stylish now, and that's what people want. And so it would have more value than one that's still cracker boxed up and those kind of
Yeah,
things.
certainly. It's the quality, it's the condition, it's the features that that homes have that distinguish them amongst other homes in the market area, and those are all indicators or attribute to value.
Yeah. So, but once again, I think you can still, when you get all done with your evaluation, you can kind of say, oh, well, I'm trying to put $175 per square foot in everything
neighborhood.
else it's 90.
Yeah.
And that can happen.
Yeah.
But that's the classic case of where you've got the best house in the neighborhood.
Right.
It's going to be brought down by the value of the other ones around it.
We
So,
certainly, yes, want to be conscious of outliers. It would be odd to appraise a home in a neighborhood where, let's say, the average price per square foot is $100 a square foot, and you are appraising this home either for $200 a square foot or $50 a square
Correct.
foot. That would be an outlier, and there would be some strong concern.
well,
on those
but the
numbers.
point of it is, it may be in fact true.
It may be.
But then that, in your report, you're going to justify that.
Right, right. And typically in an appraisal, I'm not sure if it's the same in brokerage, we would call that property either over improved or under improved for the immediate market area.
Yeah, okay. So those are the kind of things that I think that I know we run into. And when I teach, this small segment on CMAs, I always get that pushback and it says, oh, well, I just, price per square foot. And, but these homes can look very similar. Now that brings up another thing that when you talked about, you go inside and you look and stuff and you always hear about the drive-by appraisal. What's the deal with that? I mean,
So what the appraiser does is determined by what we call scope of work, right? And that scope of work is agreed upon by the appraiser and the client. So sometimes a lender, we'll use that as an example, will order a drive-by or an exterior-only appraisal. And the rationale for that is oftentimes they're trying to save the borrower some money, so it's less expensive to complete an appraisal
on like a refi.
on a refi or something like that.
Or a home equity.
Or home equity, absolutely. Typically, drive-bys or exterior-only appraisals are where loan-to-value is quite a bit lower. So they still have to have an appraisal, but there's not this concern really as to what the value of the appraisal comes out as, because it will surely come out enough to where they need to get their loan. But it doesn't constitute a full interior appraisal by the appraiser.
And so in those cases, maybe you're just going to make sure that there hasn't been any additions or gutters hanging down or things like that.
And it's based on an assumption by the appraiser that the condition of the home on the inside is the same as what they can observe from the outside.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes that's true, sometimes it's not. The two factors, obviously, where it's not, or two situations, is you may be a person that has spent a lot of money remodeling, updating the inside of your home, but you've not spent much updating the outside of your home. And there's some good reason for doing that, because again, the assessor doesn't see the inside of your home, so it might be to keep your taxes lower. However, the value of that appraisal may not reflect the interior condition of the home.
Sure.
The same could be true on the opposite, to where the outside of your home looks quite nice, but maybe you've gutted the entire interior of the home. So, in that case, the exterior-only appraisal or drive-by appraisal may misrepresent the value of the home in that way.
But they have their purpose.
But they have their purpose, absolutely.
Okay. Well, now let's just talk about, I'm the listing agent, and we've gotten a contract in on the house, and of course it's subject to financing, and now the buyer is going through that process, and as a part of that, of course, the lender's going to order an appraisal. Now, I'm the listing agent. What should I do? Should I be there when they appraise? Should I give the appraiser information? I mean, what do we do?
Sure. So all appraisers are different, just like all agents are different. So the information that I would say is somewhat specific to what, I think is appropriate, but you just have to realize there may be some balance here, for different appraisers. But certainly I would say, at a minimum, if you're the listing agent and you want to be present for that appraisal, I think you have that right, at least in my case, to be present for that appraisal, and I encourage it.
Now, there are going to be other appraisers that say
They don't want you there.
They don't want you there.
Yeah. But you are representing that property on behalf of the seller.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, you're working on behalf of your seller client.
Yep. I would certainly recommend, whether you're there or not, that you provide appraiser any recent improvements. You can hand them a sheet of paper. Listen, these are the recent improvements that my seller has completed on this property. Otherwise, you have to realize that they might not know, especially if it's things that they can't see. For instance, maybe they had the house rewired, right? Well, the appraiser is not going to open up walls. They might see a new panel, but they aren't going to know whether that house has been rewired or not, or maybe there's added insulation. Those things may equate to value, but they're things that the appraiser can't see. Certainly things like roofs, furnaces, hot water heaters. You've done an updated or a remodeled kitchen. Now, the appraiser should see that.
Right.
The same thing in the bathrooms, but it still doesn't hurt to provide them with a list. And included in that list, I would even suggest, if your homeowner has a record of what those things cost, provide them to the appraiser. It can't hurt. Also from an agent's perspective, I don't think that it's a bad idea to provide that appraiser with potential comparable sales. So we're going to assume that the agent did a CMA on the property when they listed it, right? And so show them, how did you come up with your list price? Or maybe more importantly, you have to know this: if the neighbor's house across the street sold, and it's similar to the subject property, but it's sold for way lower, or even somewhat lower than the price that is being offered, or your listing price, or something like that, it would be very important to point out why you don't believe that that's a comparable sale.
Right.
Because otherwise,
Maybe it wasn't an arm's length transaction.
Maybe it was an arm's length. Maybe it was the house that was gutted out on the inside, or had flood damage or hail damage, or things like that. If that property has a recent survey on it, right? I think that's great information to provide the appraiser. Sometimes the question comes up about listing agent versus buyer's agent, right? Oftentimes the buyer's agent would not be meeting the appraiser at the property, but the listing agent, I think that's certainly appropriate that they meet the appraiser at the property.
And so once again, I think we get caught up in the personalities of people, and but I think you have to kind of play that by ear. If you're the agent and the appraiser says, "No, I don't want any of that," then stay away.
Yeah.
So it's just the way you have to play it. Now, yourself, you appreciate those kind of things.
I appreciate those type of things. And again, I think at a minimum, still, if you have the appraiser that says, "No, I would prefer you not be there," I think it's still appropriate to say, "Hey, can I provide you a list of improvements, or a copy of my CMA, or
that
something
I did,
like that?"
and here's how we came up with the price.
And again, with my personal experience, I don't know of very many appraisers in our industry that would reject receiving that information.
Okay. And that doesn't violate any USPAP standard or anything like that?
It does not. So one of the misconceptions that comes up oftentimes is that the realtor can't talk to the appraiser.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah. Oh, I can't talk to the appraiser.
Yeah, you can't talk to the appraiser. There is some truth that most lending institutions have rules against the loan officer influencing, that's the key word there, influencing the appraiser positively or negatively for the value. Now again, a little bit outside of the scope of our discussion today, but loan officers, in my mind, can still communicate with the appraiser. They just can't influence value. But the realtor is not part of that FRT, in the sense that they are not influencing the value of the appraisal.
FRT, you mean federally related transactions.
So in this case, there is nothing prohibiting the agent or agents from discussing, from providing the appraiser information. I paused there for a second because the agent is not necessarily a party to the report, right?
Correct. Yeah.
They would have to have, the lender would have to provide permission in order for the appraiser, that's a confidential document, for the appraiser to discuss the report with the borrower or the agent.
Yeah.
But there is nothing.
Or the seller, or the seller's agent.
Correct. But there is nothing preventing the agent from having a conversation with the appraiser.
Now, what about the seller themselves?
Typically, in a typical transaction where it is the buyer's lender that's ordering the appraisal, if the seller is present for the appraisal, which again I encourage, you can talk to the appraiser. The appraiser is probably going to ask you a number of questions. However, the seller is usually not going to be provided with a copy of the report.
Sure.
And typically the appraiser would not discuss details of the appraisal report with the seller because they're not the client.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else on this, this interaction, I think, between agents, buyers, sellers, with the appraiser?
Well, one of the things that we encourage in working with agents is that they develop good working relationships with realtors, because that can be very mutually beneficial. Sure. Not only in just working through transactions, but also use each other as a resource, right? So, if an agent is trying to appropriately price a unique property, maybe it's in a rural area where they don't have very good data for comparable sales. Well, it would be great to be able to call an appraiser and get their opinion on it. Not having them do a full-blown appraisal on it, but just provide professional courtesy and market data for that transaction. In the same way that I often, I use the realtors that I have relationships with in our area as participants, as industry professionals, to be able to survey them, to question them, to come up with your typical buyer reaction or market reaction to certain features of homes. What are they seeing? Because to be honest, realtors have far more interaction with participants in the market, being buyers or sellers, than what the typical appraiser will.